welcome back to my small little library. Let's talk about my 10 favorite books I've read this year. I have to be totally honest, I had a very average reading year, so these are pretty much all of the really good books I've read. Yeah, I don't know, I had a lot of like average books, like a lot of 3 stars. So yeah, and definitely a lot more bad books than I had really good books. But that being said, I have 10 books that I would really recommend reading and that I've read this year, and only one is a reread because yeah, I tried not to include rereads because otherwise I could have included like The Lord of the Rings and, you know, those really good books that I've reread this year, but I decided to only put one reread in, and yeah, I think that is fine. So the first book that we're starting with is, I'm gonna put the cover here, but that is called The Genome Odyssey, and it is a non-fiction book by this author. I forgot his name, I'm really sorry. But it is a book about pretty much the research that goes into the human genome and the research that happens with like genetic illnesses and helping the people figure out what is wrong with them, what happened, and how we can fix those problems. And the audiobook was incredibly interesting, and I think it's one of those really important books that really helps to, you know, read once, get an understanding what we're up to with like our medicine right now and what can be done and maybe what can be helpful. So that book was incredibly interesting, and I think it was like one of those non-fiction books that like really stayed with me from this year. And I really enjoyed listening to that and just getting perspective, you know, hearing from different people who have different illnesses that are incredibly rare, and how the team around our author tried to help them, and like the connections between those different medical professionals and them helping each other out, trying to figure out the problems, was really interesting. And I think even if you're not particularly interested in like non-fiction, all of those stuff, I think it's really kind of good to have a little bit of an education in that field, you know, for if you ever come to the case, maybe if you want children, stuff like that, or like a loved one gets diagnosed with such an illness, that maybe you have a little bit more of an understanding what goes into diagnosing those things, and like, you know, learning a little bit by you have to be patient and how to support actually the people that go through all of that to find out what is wrong with them. So yeah, that was really interesting and really incredible to listen to. So I would really recommend you read that. Then, the next book that we have is Children of Memory. This is the last book in the Children of Time series, I think is the series title, and it's by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I mean, I personally think it's the weakest in the whole series, but I still gave it 5 stars because I still really liked the book. Obviously, I can't tell you much because, you know, it's the last book in the series, but yeah, I personally really loved the Children of Time series, and this was a great last book in that series. Even though, you know, sometimes my heart is like, I would love to hear more. I think it's kind of good that the series ends here, but we'll see. It only came out this year, so I mean, the series could be continued, but I guess it's probably going to end here, which I think this is a fitting ending all in all. But yeah, it was a great book. I really enjoyed reading it, and yeah, it's a book that came out this year and I actually read this year, which doesn't happen often, let's be honest. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. Then the next one is the only book that got 4 stars on this list, but I think it's like a really good mention because I kind of think back to it every now and then, which doesn't happen that often with books, to be honest, so I think it should be mentioned. And that is The Hippopotamus by Stephen Fry. This book, you have to... it's hard to stomach at times because of what is described, which includes bestiality and minors doing sexual stuff. But they are... they are there to transport the story, which, you know, I'm always one to criticize when, like, sexual assault is used in books, that it's just, most of the time, it's really not necessary. I think in here it kind of has a place, even though I think it's way too detailed in here, which is actually the reason why I gave the book 4 stars. But the complete story, I think, was really, really impactful, and it's, you know, you have the main character who's kind of an alcoholic, and he's pretty much, he was an author for like a newspaper, and a lot of people didn't like his column, and he lost his job, and then his sister, I think, or like his niece, I think is the right person, is like, well, you need to go to like my family's estate, and you need to look at the things happening there, and, you know, write up for me what is happening there, and I will pay you for that. And then he actually goes there, and he finds out what's happening, and that whole thing is so crazy, but the ending was so good that I think you should read it. It's a little bit about like influence and child geniuses and putting your child on a pedestal, and then the child just running with it, because that is what they kind of get told. I think it was really impactful, even though I think there were some scenes in here that were just unnecessarily detailed, and if you cannot stomach, I mean, you could just skip the scenes, but yeah, the things I mentioned are really in there, and you have to be prepared for that, I think, because I read those scenes and I was not prepared for them, and I had to put the book down because some of that is really disturbing. It's just, I don't want to think about it, but yeah, the complete like story and what the book kind of tells you is incredible, which is why it's on my top 10 list for the year, because it was really impactful, even though because of those weird scenes it's only got 4 stars, you know. Then we have the reread that I did include because I love this book so much, and I'm so sad that we only ever get this book by her, but that is I Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. It is a book about the Golden State Killer, and pretty much she was a crime blog writer, and sadly she didn't see her book published because she died before that of like an accidental medication problem. But yeah, it's a book about the Golden State Killer, and she interviewed a lot of police, a lot of different people through times who had something to do with the case, and then shortly after she died, actually the Golden State Killer was found, and he has been convicted, I think. And yeah, the book, for me personally, there's so much of her in this book, and I found, I mean, this book, I can listen to it over and over again, because I just find the whole way she tells the story is kind of soothing, which is weird for a true crime book. Okay, I'm really sorry, I had a phone call with my mom in between. But yeah, we're coming to the next book now, and that is my Sherlock Holmes collection that I got from my friends as a birthday gift. Here are the 10 Sherlock Holmes stories that Arthur Conan Doyle liked the best, which I think is kind of a nice collection, because obviously the author approved these stories, you know. I assume every author has his favorite stories, and yeah, these are his favorite stories. The only thing I'm not that keen on is the green color. I don't know why they did that. I think it clashes with the brown, but you know, you never see it once it's in my shelves. But yeah, this is a really, really nice edition. So 10 classic Sherlock Holmes stories, 5 stars, because to be honest, I just love the Sherlock Holmes stories. Are you okay? I love me a good Sherlock Holmes story. And I knew like roughly half of these, I would say. And the other half I didn't know yet. So that was also kind of nice. Okay, so dog is more comfortable now. But yeah, so it's nice to have some new stories. I still have not read all of the Sherlock Holmes stories, but for me this is such a classic when it comes to detective stories, and as I'm not the biggest fan of the Agatha Christie books, I think this one is the classic you should read instead of Agatha Christie. Because to be honest, I'm really not a fan of her stuff. So Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, the go-to detective story. Next up, we have a vampire story, which this was really, really surprising for me. I got this in a book box, and yeah, I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. This is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and it's pretty much like Dracula, but from the perspective of one of his wives. And she did change the story like a little bit, obviously, and much of the story pretty much plays out. It's like what happened with Dracula and his wives before he got to the point where the actual Dracula story is set. And it is a queer book. I love this. It is a really sexual book. I love that. I think it's like one of those, love stories I actually like, which is kind of interesting. And yeah, I don't know, it highlights how bad Dracula was as well to his companions as he was to, all of the other people. And it kind of shows the connection between the wives of Dracula and how they stand together in a kind of a way. And the adventures that they went through, because they kind of like moved from country to country, obviously, because they live really, really long, and it would be kind of obvious if they stayed too long. So it's also kind of historical fiction, and it's historical fiction I actually really liked, which was really, really nice. Yeah, so this was really a big surprise to me. I think it's worth reading if you like, one of those more like sexual stories, but like in like a really nice way, and you want like a different perspective on Dracula. If you love Dracula, I think this one is pretty great. Well, if you love queer stories. If you don't know what you're doing here, but yeah. Then you obviously won't like the story. But I think it's a really, really great version to read if you like Dracula and you kind of want more from the universe. Then we have the first Brandon Sanderson book of the year that I've read, and that was The Hero of Ages, the third book in the Mistborn trilogy. I loved the book. I loved the conclusion to the story. Obviously, can't really tell you much about it because the third part, there's so much happening in here. But I loved the conclusion of the first trilogy. I think it's a brilliant book. I really liked where it went. I think it's rare that I'm that happy with the ending of a trilogy, because often I feel like, too much unanswered stuff and so. But I really liked the story because he wasn't too afraid to kind of like sacrifice his characters, which I hate when people do that. I guess, yeah, you want to have your heroes living at the end of the story, but I think he really managed to do that really, really well. So yeah, if you haven't gotten around to it yet, read the Mistborn trilogy. Great, great book series, and I finally finished it. Haven't started with the second one yet, but I guess that's not that important. Then we have another really great surprise, and that is Alice. But it's not really that much of a surprise, but Alice by Christina Henry. This is pretty much the horror version of Alice in Wonderland, and it plays out in this like, you have the nice city and then you have the not so nice city, and Alice lives in the nice city, but she gets pretty much lured into the bad city, and when she comes back, her parents give her into like an asylum because she was covered in blood with a knife, and she keeps talking about horrible things that happened to her. And then in the asylum she meets Hedge, and then the story goes from there. You have all of the characters of Alice in there, but most of them are human characters, and all of them are pretty much really bad people. Like it's a book about suffering. It's really not a nice topic, but it still had the touch of whimsy that the original Alice had, which was so cool to read. I really enjoyed it. I think you have to be open for like a pretty much a mad and really, really violent version of Alice to really like this book, but I think it was really, really well done. And I really enjoyed the story, and you have all of the important characters still there, and they kind of still have their function, because let's be honest, even in the original Alice, a lot of the characters were really, really great characters, and I kind of like what Christina Henry did with the characters and how she portrayed them. Then we have a duology, or like the second book in a trilogy. I think it's supposed to be a trilogy, but the third one isn't out yet. But yeah, that is Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. this is a fantasy series that doesn't take itself too serious. It's a really fun series. And in the second book, the daughter of one of the characters of the first book plays a big role. She's not the main character, but she plays a really big role. She's called Bloody Rose. And we have another female main character who goes on an adventure with a band, and bad things happen. I obviously can't tell you what, because second book, you know. But this is like a really fun fantasy. If you want to have a fantasy where you have everything. You have the relationships between the characters, you have a lot of humor, but you have also like really emotional scenes, you have really hard stuff that is happening, you know, you have a little bit of everything. I cried at the end, have to be honest. It did make me cry at the end. But yeah, I really love this series, and if you want to have a little bit more humor in your fantasy, go for this one. Or like, start with the first one, which is Kings of the Wild, but you know, go for the series. And then, my absolute favorite book I've read this year, The Sunlet Man. I have to do it. Brandon Sanderson, his Kickstarter series, they all came this year. This was the last one to come out, and this is the one that has pretty much the like straightest connection to the Cosmere, and this is more or less directly connected to the Stormlight Archive series. This is pure adventure, and it was exactly what I needed. It is pure Sanderson adventure. It was great. I love the story. We have our Sunlet Man who comes to this planet through skipping planets, and he can only leave the planet if he has enough energy, and he doesn't. And so whilst trying to get more energy, he meets the people of the planet, and then he decides to help them out because he feels kind of bad for them. And yeah, the story goes from there. It is pure adventure, really nothing else in here other than pure adventure, which I love that so much. I think that is one of the things that Brandon Sanderson does the best, in my opinion. The adventure parts of the stories, and because this is only adventure, like, it really hit it off with me. Also, the book looks brilliant, let's be honest, you know. I think, you know, if you like Brandon Sanderson, you will probably love this book. There are really wonderful illustrations in here, and yeah, 5 stars, obviously. Yeah, I think I did even like it better than The Hero of Ages, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't have thought that after I finished The Hero of Ages. But I don't know why this one hit such a nerve with me. But yeah, I do often think about the story. I have to be honest, it's one of those stories where I wishfully think I could read it again for the first time, even though I've only read it last month. I think October or November, one of those two. So it's really not that long ago that I've read it, and I could reread it already because I loved it so much. And I think that kind of speaks for itself, you know. So yeah, those were the top 10 favorite books I've read in 2023. Yeah, I think there are a few great books here. There weren't as many as I had hoped, you know, and as I felt like, but looking back on the year, yeah, I had the majority of the books that I've read were really average. So these ones really stood out, and yeah, if you haven't read any of these, please do. I think these are really great books. If you have read any of them, please leave your opinion about them down below, or share your favorite books that you've read this year. And yeah, hopefully I will see you again in the next video. Bye bye!